All right, welcome panelists. And again, I think we are sitting or standing in between the guests and lunch. So 45 minutes is what we have, and I've been talking for half a minute already. Good afternoon, everybody. And again, thank you for honoring us with your time. I think the panelists this morning and all the conversations that happened, folks, have been pretty much talking about the things we want to really get into the heart of. I think the first thing we want to get through, and I'm going to ask Brad on the far end there. Brad, hope you can hear me.
Yes.
In that,
yes.
4 panelists is quite far. In that the payments landscape is really cluttered at the moment. I mean, if you just look around, I think Richard Saudi spoke about it as well this morning. There's opportunity coming from every walk of life. Everyone wants a piece of the pie. I just want to maybe get your sense on that as a commercial banker. How are you finding this? Is it really a disturbance of the force? Is it something that's going to help us move forward together? So maybe a couple of views, please.
Thanks, and thanks to everyone for joining today. Thanks, Vicky. I have the privilege of working in and across our Africa region's business. And I really do think that it is a conundrum that we're facing when we look at the amount of innovation that's going on, but it's isolated innovation in pockets across countries. Scaling that has always been a challenge. And so you create, what we're seeing is a high degree of cluttered payment activities. I think that's confusing to our market and our customers. And you're seeing, probably because there is this challenge to try and create the levels of efficiency that we think are needed through innovation and fintechs, and yet the regulation is always going to be one of the hindrances in the various countries. So scaling payments to create cross-border relevance is a real challenge. And yet, I also see, whilst that is the case, I also see some of our bigger networks starting to really take charge and drive a new agenda. So it's no secret that you'll see the card companies starting to drive both the traditional but also the non-traditional push payment type services cross-border. I think they've recognized the convergence, and they've recognized that they give scale and reach that is so necessary in payments. When we look at payments is about volume. It is about interoperability. Right now, though, the customer is confused and it's cluttered, and we're going to have to spend some time before it starts rationalizing itself. But I think it will rationalize itself, and I think the traditional players, if they are quick to achieving that, will be part of the solution in a world which right now I think is a very difficult one for the market and the players in the market to be relevant.
Good. So Brett talks about scaling. It's almost like herding cats to a large degree. There's just so many players coming on board, and they all want a piece of the pie. How do we get that scale? And I'm probably going to look at yourself here, Olivier, to just talk to us about how do we bring that commonality? How do we ensure that we are driving towards the future? I think everyone around this conference is seeking. So what is it that we actually need to get done?
It's a $1 million question. And maybe I don't have the answer, but I'm sure the three of us will come up with something. But maybe before I answer that question, to the point of Brad, I moved 3 years ago to South Africa, out of Europe, which I thought was an easy move when it came to the payment landscape, because I thought the other side was much more sophisticated. And I was terribly wrong. What I saw was that every day when I woke up in the morning, there was a new initiative that was going to revolutionize the world. So I had to learn to not panic every morning and to realize that we're working in Africa, which is not one country, which is composed of 54?
Depends on how you count it, yes.
It depends on how you count it. Countries, and that initiatives will pop up because there's a diverse public and there's different demands. The question is, how do you bring scalability? I think in the last 3 years, I've been trying to crack that question. I think, yeah, of course, I work for Swift, and it's all about scalability. Scalability is the game. How do you bring that in Africa and to make sure that you get that scalability? First of all, it's creating a level playing field. and at a certain point we're going to look at the regulator. How do we create that level playing field across Africa? Then I also believe we don't need to boil the ocean. I think we need to be realistic in what we can achieve. I think what I learned very quickly is that Africa is organized by regions, and that we utilize those regions to move forward within those regions. And then, as regions start to collaborate. So I don't have the answer, but from what I've seen and what I've learned is that regions can come together and can work together. For then, again, regions looking at each other and how can they then interconnect and create interoperability. So for me, that is, if we don't want to boil the ocean, that should be, or could be, the way forward.
Thanks, Olivier. I think it's important. Yeah, I think we all got this view, right? That every morning you get up and suddenly there's a new kid on the block. And we stop getting excited to a large extent. I think it's similar. Brad mentions the issue as well that, in conversations we have, is that the guys are basically fighting around the edges for things. So the center, the core of what we do as payments almost remains static to a large degree until, of course, you get Bitcoin and the cyber and whatever else that goes with it. But I think those are important points that you bring into the table, in that if we are going to be going down, let's not panic, let's not boil the ocean too much, let's not respond and knee-jerk on everything. But I would think the regulators have a large role to play, an absolutely large role to play. And I'm seeking Nomwalasi here in terms of what is it that regulators should do to enable. I think everyone kind of understands today that there's far too much regulation, there's too bespoke regulations and all kinds of stuff. Let's not unpack that. I think that's too much to worry about. But what do we need to do to move forward? So how can regulation become the enabler? Maybe just consider that for a moment or two.
Right. Yes, thank you, Vicky. I think regulators have observed and experienced this over time. And it is reality. I mean, even in one jurisdiction, there's never just one regulator that affects payments. There's multiple, even in one jurisdiction. So how much more when you have to integrate regions now? And we're talking of harmonizing regulation, but it's not going to be an overnight job to harmonize regulation and come up with universal standards that guide us all. But to the earlier point that he made in terms of, we have regions in Africa, for instance, that already have multilateral systems, running. How do we capitalize on the infrastructure that's already there? Because scalability is a challenge. He just said this is a volumes game. So you cannot, every time somebody has a brilliant idea, you start a new system, and you're not going to achieve the results. So regulation, again, I mean, it's nice that it followed the cyber conversation. And I thought, there adds my point to why regulation should exist. Trust depletion in payments would never take us forward. So it's important for us to make sure that payments remain safe and efficient. So regulation is not the ugly brother. It can be a Cinderella at some stage.
Yeah, I think those are important points that you're making. But think about, today, as I think Olivier spoke about it as well, the African continent is broken down into probably 8 regional economic zones.
Yes.
Or economic communities, which are accepted by the AU as such. And so the drive has always been to get that corridor, to get it strong in terms of trade and economics, to get the payment systems at the level where they de-risk and they also ensure that you are bringing up the trade business. So there's already portions and pockets of these harmonization opportunities.
Yes.
And I want to ask the question again, do we think we have explored that sufficiently? And are we well harmonized? Because if the future view is that we are needing to bring these regional economic zones together to kind of span the whole of Africa, surely we need to start with the RECs. And I think Olivier spoke to that, but maybe just get your sense again to finish up.
I don't even think we've scratched the surface in terms of regional integration. Yes, central banks are very conservative, and for safe reasons, we start with frameworks and make sure that we have frameworks that would govern these relationships and govern the conduct. But I think one of the challenges, we take too long, we overthink things. And we don't have that mindset that says, fail and fail fast, and you'll come up with the experiences from that. Now, when I joined Payments a bit back in this new environment in 2018, even though I was in Payments before, I attended a conference in Angola, and I had a fireside conversation with Brad, which is reminding me today of the promises I made back then. But having been, in Payments now in the NPSD since 2018, at times I want to swallow my words of the enthusiasm I had back then in 2018, because today we're still talking the same thing. And the promise I had made back then that I refused, that he must remind me, it's difficult to achieve even today.
That's true. That's true. Okay, so Brad, maybe you'll remind us of some of the promises that Nomolasi made, and maybe we'll hold it to account.
I've got them here.
At some point. It's a little black book that's got it. But Brad, I want to just pick on you again quickly, just to maybe give us a sense of, so while we normalize some of the regulations and harmonize some of the regulations, I think what we tend to do is almost get into these new ways of thinking, kind of the me too, I'm in it. So I can put it on my badge, and my bank can be seen as participating. What does it mean from a cost-driving perspective, and around the friction that we're seeing, and all kinds of other things that still haven't been solved? But I would presume just focus on the cost side. What do all of these infrastructures mean from a commercial bank perspective, in terms of participations?
Okay. So let me just sort of. I was thinking about all the things you were saying, and then I thought, no, I'm going to have to talk about that. No, the regional intent which we've got, okay, so we've got all these regions around the continent which are absolutely there to drive the benefit of those markets, and actually into market as well. And in every one, underpinning it is an expectation that it'll be fulfilled through usually it's a financial service, it's a payment system. The challenge we've got is, one, does it bring scale and volume, or is it just another rail to which we have to connect along with our existing rails, and it dilutes the volume, and payments is a volume business, okay? And therefore, it has a direct impact on cost. So if it does that and is not bringing volume, then you've got to question, why would you do that? You could still benefit the regional intent with existing services that you have already got plumbed in and you're able to utilize. However, if the service is different and is crafted for the benefit of that region, with the regulation that enables it, then I think you've got a question or a solution that is worth pursuing, because it is a very difficult scenario in a world where you're trapped by correspondent banking, and as an interest, I've raised this in our prep sessions around correspondent banking and its future, particularly across the continent. But you're trapped by a lot of the correspondent banking legacy, and so you're not getting the efficiencies that you could get if you could unlock it regionally. But you have to have the differentiator, and you have to have the regulators wanting to support that. I believe that even in the regulation space, if we are ever going to do something, now is the time, because we have the digital capability, we have the new technologies that will unlock the regulatory piece as well. Because let's face it, we need regulation. The last people who were talking, absolutely, if you want to question trust in the payment system, they were proving it in their conversation. We need to have something that we can trust. So regulation is imperative, but efficient regulation and also fit-for-purpose regulation that differentiates and supports the region.
Thanks, Brad. I'm just writing a couple of things. I think the audience is agreeing with a lot of your points that you're making, by the way. I can see, unfortunately, quite a few anonymous. I can't call you by name, unfortunately. Talking about convergence is a known reality, so what are we doing about it? How are we speeding up some of those journeys? So I think, the bits between the teeth, from what my understanding is, and we need to start moving quite fast forward. Otherwise, we'll be talking in the next conference, and I'll probably disappoint everybody about the same thing.
Yes.
But I want to pick on Olivier quickly, and I'll come back to some of the questions, audience. My sense and belief here is that the payment system itself does not dictate to markets. Markets itself will inform what it needs to get done. And the payment system tends to follow that. And we heard earlier, I'm going to pick on you quickly, we heard earlier in one of the panels where the view was that we tend to over-regulate and this and that, but I'll come to that, no more Lassie, so prepare yourself. On the infrastructure side, is it about the tech? Is it really about the tech? Is it really about the payment systems itself that is actually at the heart of the concerns?
That's a good question. I would tend to say that it isn't. I think technology is there and is already allowing, and I'm looking at it from a Swift perspective at the global point of view, a speedy payment system. But it's not the technology that, if you look at speed of payments, that is slowing it down, which doesn't mean that technology can help some of the issues we're facing. But if we look at speed of payment, and we're going to publish, or the FSB is going to publish some figures, you will be astonished to see from a wholesale perspective how fast payments are into the beneficiary bank. There's a delay when it comes into crediting the beneficiary account, and that's where we struggle at the moment. And why is that? That is because there is regulation, like exchange control regulation, that delays payment into the account. There is difference in time zone. There is compliance aspect. There is cyber. The fact that we need to screen messages, that there's a lot of false positives. So as much as it is DLT or any other network, they can be very fast. But it's the environment that we need to cater for. And I think that's a difficult one. That's one thing. The other thing is also, our world in Africa is very different from the world in Europe, to be very honest. If I look at here, account to account, we can cover it. Bank to bank, we cover it. But the world in Africa is not account to account. The world is account to a wallet, and it's been mentioned, M-Pesa. How do we create interoperability, network optionality into our reality, which is very different from any other reality? So we cannot use technology as an excuse to not cater for people, to not provide speed. But I do believe that collaboratively, we need to look at the whole ecosystem and see how we can take some of those hindering elements away or facilitate them through potentially technology regulation and all we're mentioning.
Interesting. So Nomalasi, I've given you time to prepare your answer for this, but let me position this carefully. And thanks, all of you. I think that's an important point that you made here. So if we're sitting in an environment, let's talk about the SADC because it's close to home. And the SADC have got, the central bank governors have signed up against the agreements. They're all sitting in this mechanism, I'll call it, where you have understanding of oversight mechanisms, you've got peer-to-peer mechanisms, you've got all these things that talks about supervisory and other pieces. And I can Brad's point earlier, why is it taking us that long to then harmonize? Because a couple of our guests are screaming at me saying, Vic, you're not answering the question. And the questions are, what will it take actively when we leave this conference to say, today is Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, maybe next week, Monday, we'll give you a break. What can we do to start moving that dial forward? Because harmonization of the regulation, which I'm hearing, seems to be the sticky points and bringing friction and adds cost, must be addressed if we are going to get the ideal of the African Union promise.
Well, I suppose as central banks that are regulating and supervising payments, we need to start moving together at the same pace. Now, that reminds me of an initiative where we are looking at a proposal to have a BIS innovation hub in SADC. And once we have an innovation hub that is representative and all of us in SADC are participating, it might be, a stepping stone to fast-track innovations. The concept of sandboxes to co-create with the industry, where especially the central bank sandboxes are meant to fast-track and look at all elements of regulation with the regulators together. And to my earlier point is that even in one jurisdiction, there's more than one regulator. Now, imagine this innovation hub, a SADC innovation hub, where we're going to co-create together and put products to market faster with the regulation elements being considered, in tandem with co-creating. That might, make us leapfrog, the delays we've experienced. But once again, regions have what's the word, where they want to preserve what is theirs. And political, agendas are different from one region to the other. So at some point, aligning to political agenda and getting political support for some of these things is going to be very critical, because we have principles as well as regulators. It goes like
So politicize the payment system.
exactly.
Keep the thought processes out in the collaboration space. I think that's important. But I think the peer-to-peer mechanisms that we're talking about and the sandbox that you speak to, my sense is that we are finding a shift in the regulator's mindset towards sharing that space. Because, again, I'll come back to the markets decide. The markets will find a way, whether formal or informal, they'll find a way.
Something is
And I think we've been too often sitting as banks talking about this is what we'll allow, this is what we'll not allow. Is it really ours to decide, Brad?
No.
Is it us to decide as commercial banks that we'll play with this partner and not play with that partner, when the markets are saying, actually, I want better from everyone? So just opening that question, I know it's a broad question, but who do you think we need to start partnering with? Central banks have said, we will come to the party, we'll create sandboxes. Who else do we need to bring with?
I absolutely don't think payments is now the purveyor of banks. You just have to look. In fact, it's not even a question that I should answer. You just have to look across the continent. You have to look at where the real transactional activity is for retail, for the consumer. It's not on a bank account. It's sitting on, we all know this, mobile money, wallet accounts.
Yeah.
There's estimated to be 1 billion of these stores of value. That is where the transactional activity is. So, if we would be naive to think that we should not be partnering with these types of organizations, and they've created their own networks. A lot of them are bespoke to themselves, but they are vast. Take the money transfer operators. They are vast. They are vast by bringing funds into the continent, and they are vast putting money across the continent. That's not an EFT. That's not a SWIFT. That's not a card transaction. That's their own network. So we have to bring them into the equation. We not only have to, it is part of where the future lies. And so the result will be a far better outcome if the partnerships can occur. Hard, because sometimes I think it's like, well, we're letting go. But is there enough activity? Because the real opportunity is not in payments digitally, it's in the cash displacement of the transactions that are occurring there. That's where, 93%, I'm staggered. 93% in SA, I'm staggered. In the rest of the continent, it's absolutely the same. And we need to be able to target that. And collectively, if we target from a digital point of view, we'll get there. But it has to be with a willingness to partner. And that's both parties. And it's hard yards. We've all got examples. We've all got scars.
Yeah. Thanks, Brad. I think, again, maybe to Olivier now. So the banks have always been the suppliers of service to the payment systems, basically. We in a self-regulating type organization. You come with the services, you come with the products, you build the thing, you build the interbank rules, and then you put it out there to the market. And it's always been that way. So I think the edge cases that we're talking about, banks have been quite poor at, is mandate management, consent management, all those kind of things that allow us to do that risk mitigation, allow us to play it differently, that banks are not traditionally good at. So maybe that's where the question was coming in. And I'm going to just put a point at Olivier here. Again, maybe responding to Brad's response here and just adding to it. Who are the other players we need? Not just infrastructure, but other services, edge services, whoever they may be, and maybe just to help the audience think broader than an account-based service.
Yes.
If you may.
That's a nice one. I would have preferred that to go to one of my colleagues. No, who are the other players we need? Look, we clearly don't operate in a vacuum. And maybe more than to say who are the other players that we need, I think, interoperability is going to be key, and I'll come back to that. But if I look at the payments landscape, first of all, nobody got up this morning and said, today I'm going to make a payment. That didn't happen, okay? So we're all kind of trying to find a solution to a problem. I think the bigger issue is that we need to foster trade. We need to foster trade within our continent because payments are happening and payments are happening efficiently. How do we make them happen efficiently within our continent? So the first one is how do we bring trade back home? And maybe I'm touching already on another question we're going to ask, but how do we bring that back home? And what do we need to do that? Okay, and that's maybe not for me with my Swift hat on to answer. If we bring that back home, how do we make it more efficiently and who do we need around the table? And I kind of alluded already to it. It's going to be a game of interoperability. Okay, nobody's going to do it all. I do believe that banks have a key role into this. I think they are the cornerstone of our economy, but they might not be delivering all of the services, or they might collaborate with other players to deliver more of those services. Yeah? Whether that's then a wallet provider, that's insurance, whether that's lending, I think there will be higher levels of collaboration needed going forward to serve our economies in the market.
Yes.
So yeah, I'm not to say it's left or right.
Yeah.
And Richard touched upon it this morning. It's about collaboration. It's kind of a cheesy word, but the reality is that's where we will have to go. Interoperability and collaboration are going to be key to make it happen. But again, my personal belief, and that's a personal belief, is that banks do remain fundamental to our economies. Okay, and that I don't see changing. Yeah. How do we serve the greater and the bigger population from an African perspective? That is a different discussion.
Yes, I mean, I would second that. Financial stability is a key, mandate of 100%. The central bank. And by no means do we want to weaken our banks because they're very critical to financial stability. And to that point, I say we because don't see me as outside this.
Exactly.
We are we. So as we should stop competing on things that do not make us superior to the customer. It still boggles me today why AVS is not standard in any service that is offered by banks. Do we want to regulate this for banks to respond to it? I'm not so sure. I don't know when the first ATM started being written in vernacular, but I know in my world it made a difference to my mother. Being able to understand the language of technology and go to an ATM that speaks a language that she can understand so that she is not assisted by someone else when she's transacting, because money is a very private matter. I want to see who can expose on this platform their bank balance today. Nobody wants to do that. So you now get the very people who want to include being engaged in a language they do not understand to the extent that they need to call somebody to use the ATM. Eventually, we've seen ATMs in vernacular. I still have to see a banking app that is in vernacular today. Are we going to take another 20 years to make it inclusive for people to understand money when we are saying there's AI that can write in many other languages? So why are we not putting hands together? Yeah. Or do we want this to be a regulation as well? To say every app would have an AI that translates into a language that is used by its community? I don't know.
But as you talk about ATMs, and this goes back into cash, so we don't want to talk about cash,
Yes.
but to give an example where the collaboration, and if I look to other markets, what they did is to be able to focus on what is really relevant and create scalability, said, look, ATMs is not where we, for example, are going to compete as banks.
Exactly.
If you look to the Netherlands as a market, they created a cooperative, and all ATMs belong to all banks. Okay, they said, let's not waste time on infrastructure there, but let's compete on what is more relevant. And that's where we still can grow as much as I believe, and I said it to Brad before the panel, I think when I look at South Africa, it is a very well-established banking scene that is comparable but to any European market, but still we need to learn to collaborate and put the focus and put the energy where we can make the difference. So I think that's a very important one.
Yeah. So again, thanks, guys. I think the audience are getting a couple of questions in terms of where we want it to be. Talking about the open standards of ISO 20022, how did that actually come to play? The role of the central bank around ensuring that that is as entrenched as we can. So interoperability is a key issue here. Also talking about, the whole of the SADC world and the whole of the African world, trying to bring that whole conversation together. I want to switch gears very quickly. I really want to switch gears quickly here. And let's talk about CBD. I forgot the C.
CBDC.
Because I think if CBD is, say, that's probably what we need before lunch, a bit of hemp oil on our skins or wherever else. But I think CBDCs are important. It's a construct that is becoming, more and more topical every day. We're hearing at some point in time the central banks were standing on top of things and wanting to regulate. Now they are beginning to start getting into the play. I'm not looking at yourself here, Nomolasi. I think any one of the panelists can pick this up because it's kind of technical sometimes.
Yes.
But where we're going with CBDCs, central bank digital currencies, and ensuring that it has a role to play. And I'm just trying to understand in terms of the decashing of the environment, the acceptance of the ecosystems. We spoke, I think Richard Southey and his team as well, spoke this morning about the ecosystem, about the business models and all of those things changing. What role does CBDC has to play with this? So again, looking at the panelists, anyone pick that up? Brad, go.
I think that there's a real role. We're still trying to define it in terms of what it will do. I was thinking about it earlier and thinking, well, does it really work well as a replacement for cash? And it probably does in a retail sense. In a wholesale sense, you've got to start saying that does it start presenting, back to the point I made about correspondent banking across the continent, it's a tough business. Particularly because it's then usually in hard currency. If it's not USD, it's euros or something like that. And it's hard to get some of those models in place to support that. And I see you smiling over there. So I think there's a real role. Just quite how it will work, I don't know. And the one thing that worries me is we're spending all this time and effort on ISO 20022. And we are modernizing. And it's going to carry the data. And it's great. Okay? As long as we do that and we commercialize it. But then where does CBDC and that type of technology fit in? Is it in 5 years' time? Or is it next year? And does one cannibalize the other? Or are we just creating more confusion in a short term?
Okay. Interesting questions. Thanks. Brad, you want to pick up on one?
Do I want to pick up? Yeah, you put a lot of questions out there, Brad. Look, first of all, ISO 20022, it is about, and it said before, I think Richard looked at my notes, enlarging the data set. Okay, and that can bring, that brings us in the next era. Okay, if you start thinking about it, and we can start very, very conservative about making payments faster because we can do much more efficient screening and so on. So that's the, but I think then beyond that, there's a vast possibility. Or a vast possibility of opportunities that are being created through ISO 22. But we're not there yet. If we look at CBDCs, I think we clearly need to distinguish wholesale, cross-border, retail CBDCs, because I think it's a very different discussion on whether we look at wholesale, cross-border, or whether we look at domestic retail as such. I do meet a lot of central banks when it comes to the wholesale cross-border perspective. I think a lot of central banks from that perspective are still trying to understand what we're going to solve with CBDCs, okay? Knowing that we already have wallets who do a big part of the job. Can you take away cash? I think that's what they're trying to do in Nigeria. I think we can learn a lot from the e-Naira and how that is evolving. It doesn't look a straightforward one as it is. I think it then depends on how you implement it and that you really understand what you want to achieve. Again, CBDC is a digital currency. As far as I'm concerned, from where I'm sitting at Swift, currencies are already very digital. Okay, so we really need to look at this as to what we want to achieve. Okay, and that's where there's still a bit of groundwork to be done, and it's at different levels. It's not just one CBDC. And then if you go to wholesale and you go to cross-border, how you create, again, interoperability. So I think it's easier to look at CBDCs from a domestic context at the moment than really widening it up at a cross-border perspective. But yeah, I'm happy to hear other people about what what it's going to bring. I think we're still in early stages as far as I'm concerned.
Good. So picking up on that, I think from a wholesale perspective, I'm kind of hearing that this is the space of the central banks.
Yeah.
They probably got it cornered. It's the settlement obligations. It's wholesale stuff. You pick up on domestic, and I think you're correct. In domestic, you're probably looking at where decashing the environment and potentially getting to a point where the visibility that cash does not provide today will probably become the thing that you want to chase. Cross-border becomes interesting. I think this morning, again, we heard from the panels that, you know, when you're on a single blockchain, everything is quite cool. You've got a single ledger, you've got whatever it is. But the minute you want to go cross CBDCs, because it's a domestic issue, you know, the likes of the BIS today is chasing aspects of multi-bridge CBDCs, and maybe, you know, whoever understands that topic better, maybe just explore that briefly for the community as well. Oliver, call on you.
Yeah, I think we're all looking at making cross-border payments more efficient. Okay, and from where I sit, it's not different. Okay, although people would be surprised how efficient they already are. There still works to go. Now, is technology like DLT going to take that away? It's not going to take away problem of time zone. It's not going to take away the problem that you need to screen in order to avoid all the problems we're going to have. So I believe that technology as DLT or CBDCs, which then is another virtual currency, still going to bump into exchange control regulation as an example. Okay,
Yeah.
Is DLT going to take that away? I don't believe so. Now, we need to look as an industry to how do we do exchange control regulation in a more efficient way, and I think that's a different discussion. And that's one that we need to have and that we're having. So from where I'm sitting, we realize, and that's me as Swift talking, that the world is going to be more fragmented. Whether that's a CBDC or something else, the world is looking at more fragmentation. How do we create interoperability in those bridges, whether that's a DLT network, a central network, a DeFi, a CeFi network, whatever. If I listen to Mike, it's whatever it is. How do we create those bridges? The reality is that we'll need more interoperability, and I think from our perspective, that is what we're looking at. Being a cooperative, how do you create that going forward? But I don't have a crystal ball to say it's going to be a CBDC. It might be called a CBDE. I'm just saying something. But things will evolve, and fragmentation is there, and necessarily could be in certain things a good element. So yeah.
Yeah. So
Awesome.
I'm a bit quiet on the issue of CBDC
I'm
on
hearing so.
purpose, so that's intentional. Central banks are very conservative, and our stance is that let's be fast followers, and we have explored and understood the technology. And to the earlier point, it's difficult to find what is it trying to solve for. As you say, it's not going to do away with the frictions we experience in cross-border payments. So what is the value proposition, to be clear?
Fantastic.
We're understanding that environment.
So folks, we've got 6 minutes on the clock left. I want to just pose a question which I have absolutely no answer for. Good thing I'm the moderator. So I can ask, and this is a question that's come from Catherine, and the question is, what do you foresee as being the payments problem statement of the day in the next 5 to 7 years? So I think what she's saying is, hope we're not going to talk about talking. So what's going to be the problem statement in 5 to 7 years?
Charging my store of value.
Well done, Catherine, you stumped them.
No, 5 to 7 years, my expectation is that it will become invisible. Payments will become more invisible, and therefore more about the experience and the purpose, and less around the payment.
Yep.
Okay, and so what is the exam question? What do I do? What do I do with
will
my
the
money?
problem
I'm going to put it
statement
into
be?
a store of value. I've got to decide which one, because it's likely not to be one store of value.
Yeah.
It's likely to be a multitude of stores of value, because that's how I will live my life. But it will be about an enablement of my daily activity.
Fantastic. Thanks, Brad. Oliver, you want to have a go?
Yeah, I must be honest, and I'm not very original here. I agree with Brad on the fact that a payment will be built in. It has to be, and I hope it's seamless. We don't even talk about it. That's what it is. I think a lot of, and the panel before touched upon it, a lot of our focus will be around, as we digitalize more and more, about making sure that we keep those environments safe, that we use the technology to do that, whether that's AI to do anomaly detection and so on. So I hope in 5 to 7 years from now we make it even more efficient. It's built in, and there will be a lot of energy to make sure that we keep the environment as safe as possible.
Yeah.
Yes. So the ideal world assumes that we would have addressed the issues we are trying to address today. When Brett says it will become invisible, it means we would have achieved, the frictions that are making it at the forefront of our thinking today. I'm skeptical. I'm skeptical of that view, but I'm hopeful at the same time. There are underlying capabilities that need to come to life, like data costs that were mentioned, the division and the allocation of the spectrum. It's a big issue, not only in this country, even in other countries. I come from a rural area in the Eastern Cape, and I know when I go home, there is no way for me to do internet banking unless I drive a distance to the tar road and then I get a signal. And those are not things driven by payments. It's going to need us to rely on other, government organs and other service providers, the MNOs, to make this affordable. And linked to that is the issue of identity. This centralized KYC, because we keep saying, let's stop competing on things that do not make us superior to our customers. It's not an overnight thing, because identity is not centrally in the domain of payments. Reliance on other authorities is going to be key here. So 7 years, it sounds too short as time spent for me.
So, Catherine, my understanding
is
is
2018 when I joined. I was
going to pick on that.
We have to be positive. After this morning, we have to be very positive.
So Brad, when did the Angola conversation have? How long ago was that?
Oh, no, it wasn't. It was a long time ago.
Okay.
Long time ago. It was about 5 years ago.
Yes, it was about 5 years ago. I'm not saying we will not move forward. We would have moved forward, but I don't think payments would be invisible. Payments would still be a struggle that we are pushing forward.
But Nomalazi, you're touching on the inclusion part, and I think, there's a lot of aspects and layers into making payments, and I think the inclusion part is one where I think we still have quite of a mileage to go. And maybe indeed MNOs will solve for it. But I think that's an angle of the discussion that maybe we didn't really went into depth, but which in our region is very relevant. And maybe 5 to 6 years might be a bit short when it comes to that. I agree with you.
Good, folks. With a minute and 32 on the clock, maybe just summarize quickly, and then I'll thank you guys for your views and inputs. So I'm hearing a couple of things coming through here. One is that it's going to be multi-wallets. There's no debate about this. Customers are going to choose which way they go, and they will not want to be dictated in where they hold their money. So all stakeholders to the party, I'm hearing. The sandboxing capability of bringing all the stakeholders, including the central banks, regulators, to start managing and understanding what the market wants for once. Okay. I'm also hearing about the collaborative space where traditional service providers may not necessarily be the only ones in there. So again, all service providers coming on board, edge service, technologies, and other coming in to make the space better. Removing friction is a key piece, and we spoke quite a lot about the various things that contribute to it, and it's not just policy. I think there's other issues as well that causes friction. And again, I think we spoke about the multiple wallets. So I think that's kind of the key takeouts that I'm picking up from here, which says that, Catherine, we're probably not going to answer your question in a 5 to 7 year period. But I think what we are saying is that there's definitely movements in the right direction. And if we have the collaboration between all the stakeholders in this space, we will definitely move at the right pace. I think our biggest concern is how do we keep the environment safe. Risk seems to be the major contributor towards anything else we do. Folks, with that, I want to thank My panelists, thank you very much for your insights, for your specific roles that you play in the ecosystem as well. And everyone, thank you very much.